Hello and happy Friday, and thanks for tuning in to radiofreerhinecliff.org. And this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm, and I'm thrilled to be here with Mr. Spike Vrusho. Hi, Spike. Happy Friday.
Hi, Norm. Same to you.
Thank you so much.
Yes. High Energy Friday.
Yeah. Come on, pick it up a little. It's gorgeous out all of a sudden.
Yes, let's move this outside.
We can see from the nook here at the fabulous Epicurean Corner store in Rhinecliff, which is so gracious to host us every week. Were you working today, Spike?
Yes, a full Friday taxi shift today.
And what's, for those of you who don't know Spike, he, amongst many other things, and hopefully we'll get to all of them in this hour-long show, drives a local cab here in Rhinebeck.
Yep, I've been a driver for Red Hook Rhinebeck Taxi for, I think, 14 years now.
14 years.
Yeah. The longest I've had any job in my life.
Really?
Yeah,
what's the runner-up?
Let's see. I did, I can't even think. They've all been like 2 or 3 year stints at trade journals and failing newspapers. So this is the longest.
You chose well.
I guess as someone, you always got to get from point A to point B, I figure. So that will be like that from here until the year 3033.
Yeah.
When Uber will have a special. No.
And what about Uber? Did you ever think of doing Uber stuff?
No, it's too corporate. It's too evil. We're a local small business. Our app is called a telephone number. And, we keep it simple. At least I do. And
what number do you dial into the special equipment that gets you the taxi?
Well,
it's 876 something.
Yeah, we have several numbers. 876-2010 is the main. It's been around for 34 years. So it's one of the oldest taxi companies in the county, easily.
And how did you land with them?
I don't know. I was in between jobs up here. I quit the Poughkeepsie Journal as a copy editor to write a book. I was just about to finish the book, and I noticed the taxi sitting at Rhinecliff Station. And I thought, I almost wanted to be a taxi driver in New York City, but that back then was a huge bureaucratic nightmare and also probably a death sentence. But, and I thought, I just approached this Indian guy, and I asked him, I said, are you looking for drivers? And he was, and then off we went.
So you approached a driver in a...
It happened to be the owner. So there were a lot of these guys own their own... The owners drive. Uh-huh. They're very involved. And the owner of my company is extremely involved and knows the business. And we have regular customers that we've had for, over a decade.
Right.
3 times a week they use us to go wherever.
And you've been doing it for 14 years?
Yeah, I did the math.
And thank you.
Never do the math. That's one of my rules.
The math is always depressing.
All that rent in Brooklyn, don't do the math.
But that was 14 years here. You weren't driving in the
No, like I said, I looked into it briefly, and so it was in the back of my head. I wouldn't mind doing that because I love driving. And, growing up in Ohio, you do a lot of driving. And you start at an early age, and it's a great. The motion is great. I love being on the go.
The motion, that's interesting.
Yeah,
the motion is great.
Yeah, it's the scenery. It's like being in one of those movies where they have the fake background, like Hitchcock chase scenes.
Yeah,
I mean, I go through the same routes and the same scenery, and it never gets old. Crossing the Rhinecliff Bridge is awesome every time.
It's so beautiful.
It is.
It's
stunning.
Gorgeous every time.
Yep.
I crossed yesterday morning, and they were like 7:30. There were clouds on the river and fog. It was so beautiful. So you must get a lot of stories.
I do.
You must see a lot of stuff.
I collect them. Sometimes I write about them on Facebook, but I'm always careful to not reveal the identities of, only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. They used to say that on old TV shows.
But people I read as many of them as I could to prepare for this. And we've been Facebook friends for a while, so I've seen them sort of over the years. People, I guess, could probably identify themselves if they read these.
Yeah, if they tracked them down. I'm not naming names, but, legally I'm okay, I guess. But, yeah, people, when they get in a taxi, it's kind of like with the bartender. They get somewhat confessional, or they get contemplative. They're like, oh, I'm being driven. I get to ride. I can look at the scenery. Most of them look at their phone. So they miss the view on the Rhinecliff Bridge because they're looking down.
Right.
And they look up when we've arrived at the Airbnb in Woodstock. And, oh, we're here? I'm like, yeah, you just missed like the greatest scenery in the world. But it's not.
Yeah. That's funny.
You can watch it on YouTube later or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, people share their innermost secrets here in this radio show too, Spike.
Heard,
so feel free
I've heard,
to say whatever you want.
Between you and Allison, that her show, you guys are really prying open the human psyche.
Well, she's really good. She's got great questions. I'm just fluffy and fun.
Yeah.
So you've written, how many of these do you think you've written on Facebook?
Oh man, I'm terrible at compiling, but I'd say probably around 25. That's a rough estimate.
And is there any idea of collecting them somewhere?
Yeah, I've actually put them all in one file in my Microsoft Word queue.
You backed it up, I hope.
Of course not. I'm going to rely on my daughter to do that. But the thing is, I have to look back because I think sometimes I'm repeating myself. I'm using imagery or phrases that I kind of fall back on. And language, is I like to toy with it. I like archaic language. I like, just to throw a word out there that makes people stop and maybe look it up,
And who are some of the writers that you like? You mentioned archaic language, and actually one of the impressions I had reading those things, they read sort of like a cross between Damon Runyon and Tom Waits.
Well, that's a good. Those are two good goalposts there. William Burroughs was a big influence on me. Just even though I don't do the drugs that he's done, I've never done drugs, but Hubert Selby, Henry Miller. There's several others that are slipping away from me now on the library shelf, but I like kind of that seedy, down and out stuff. It draws me in.
Raymond Chandler,
yeah, of course. I'm trying to think of the other, or perhaps a female writer. Joan Didion was excellent. It's the usual kind of hipster references from the 80s and 90s. Bukowski, of course.
Right.
Everyone was reading that in college. And it was easy to get roped into that romance of like a guy who's like boozing at the bar, and the publisher sends someone to his house to find his manuscripts and then print them, while he's still like boozing it up and getting in bar fights. And that's kind of fantasy, but
in this case, it's your kid who's got to find the manuscripts on the actual computer.
Well, who knows if they're even mine anymore? People say they're published by Meta now or Facebook. Do I still, there's a lot of legalities here that I have no idea what.
I can't imagine that Meta or Facebook takes any ownership of the things that you've published.
Yeah. You hear a lot of theories. I don't know, but I do have, I could cobble these together into a collection. I might do that. I probably should have done it during the lockdown, but that's when I started to compile. But, I drive like novelists that teach at Bard, and they get in the taxi, and they just had these are big time writers, and their book came out, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? And congratulations. And they're kind of sad because, they didn't get a review at all in the Times, or the Times critic didn't quite like their book, and they're, and then I go to Topps, and you see this 8x8 cardboard box full of books for $1. It's these are things that people sweated over and all that work, and there it is in a grocery store for $1. It's as a writer, you're like, what have I done, or why are we here?
There you go. And even books by big name authors will be in the
absolutely.
$1. Yeah, a friend of mine who was a painter way back when in Soho and sold his paintings for like $6,000 to $12,000. He was fairly successful. He sold out most of his shows. He said he liked to imagine them in like 30, 40, 50 years at a yard sale somewhere.
Yeah.
And somebody stumbles on it and says, "Oh, this is really gorgeous. Sure, I'll give you $20 for it.
It matches my sheets."
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the way it is. And there's this myth, ars longa, vita brevis, that somehow art withstands the test of time.
Yes, it's impressive Latin there.
Yeah, that's all I know.
SMU.
And yeah, SMU. And that's where I went to college. Where did you go to college?
I went to Ohio University, journalism school. That's why I'm driving a taxi now. No, it was a fabulous experience. I was there right out of high school in '82. Finished in 4 years. Athens, Ohio is a bit of a trap.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And apparently the marijuana there is excellent. And that's why a lot of people, all the stoners.
So you've heard.
I've heard, and because I really don't partake, even though I grew up with 4 older siblings. And I'm sure I've smelled cannabis before around my crib. So
the sisters
I'm a secondhand
blow
pot
smoke
smoker
into their baby brother's face.
Secondhand pot smoker, I guess.
Let's get Spike high. And what was your name back then? It was. I'm guessing they didn't call you Spike on the birth certificate.
They did, because every male child born in 1964 was named Michael. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, it's true.
Luckily, I was born before, so I could be called Norman.
Well, I'll take Norman over. There in my class in school, of 17 students, I think 9 were named Mike. So everyone had. You're playing kickball, and someone says, "Hey, Mike," and you turn around, it gets dangerous because you can get hit in the face, and because you're not looking. So everyone got nicknames, and I think my brothers started calling me that. And then in college, I was working for 2 newspapers at the same time, which I wasn't supposed to be, and I needed a pen name. So that's where Spike.
You needed a pen name for one of them.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was Spike.
Yeah.
Vrusho. I'm guessing you didn't make up Vrusho.
I did.
You did? You made that up too?
Actually, that was from a name tag that my sister Martha
like
found.
Michael O'Finnegan?
No, it's even more boring than that. But I have like a motel name, like motel register name, so it needed to have a little more kick. And my sister Martha, God bless her, she was in Manhattan outside of a Unitarian church, and she found a name tag on the ground. It said Spike Vrusho. She picked it up and mailed it to me. I was in college.
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, that's it. That's my pen. That's going to be my name.
Did you ever wear it to go into a place?
No, but I did hear from the real Spike Vrusho many years later. He contacted, when my book was published, I got an email. He lived in Connecticut for a while, and a guy I know who I freelanced for, his wife worked in the same office with this guy. His real name is Spiro Rusho, but they called him Spike. I don't think he liked the Spiro thing. So I never replied to that email. He was just curious as to how...
What the hell's going on?
But he was involved with the Unitarian Church. Now he's retired, living in Vero Beach, Florida. And I haven't heard from him, which was very close to where my mother lived for many years. So there's a lot of parallels here. But when you need a pen name, you need a pen name.
And did he think maybe you were related, or that you'd made up the name, it happened to be his?
He had some very basic questions. No, he didn't think there was. I think he knew his family very well, and there was no Ohio, Western Pennsylvania connection for him.
Right.
Which is where my family's from.
And what kind of a name is this name, Vrusho or Vrusho?
Oddly enough, I believe it's Ukrainian.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I didn't do it.
Amazing. So you used your real name and this nom de plume when you were double dipping in the small journalism pool of what town?
Athens, Ohio.
Ohio.
While I was in college.
And did they never find out?
No, not really. I don't think they were that interested. The one editor, again, most of the people in Athens were stoners. I mean, you could get...
That's hilarious.
And the editor was like, well, okay, you can use whatever name you want. And I'm like, let's go, And I was cranking out meeting deadlines. That's all I did.
And was that a pretty good gig, working as a journalist?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, it's the only thing I could do, really.
You studied that in college. Did you have a minor in something?
Cinema studies. I wanted to be a film critic originally, but then...
Yeah, film critic. And at some point in your youth, you had a friend who lived near a drive-in or something.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you all saw every showing of Taxi Driver.
Yes.
I don't know where I read this online.
I probably told this story in some columns or whatever. But yeah, my parents went on vacation for a week. I stayed with my friend Randy Warner.
How old were you?
We were probably in 6th grade. It came out in 77,
12
right?
or so.
Yeah, 64. doing the math. 12, 13.
Okay.
And his mom lived in an apartment building next to the drive-in. And we would sit out in the side yard every night and watch whatever movie. We had done it before, but I stayed a whole week with him, and that whole week was Taxi Driver. And I believe Silver Streak was the second movie. But yeah, watched
Richard Pryor?
Yeah. And Gene.
Gene.
It's the train movie.
Yeah.
It was okay, but Taxi Driver had a profound impact on me at that age. Just
You're a little bit young to see that movie.
I know we weren't. That's what the owner of the drive-in said. You two were two. And then my friend's mom came out and defended us. She had a cigarette. She's like, "This is private property. We can sit here." It was beautiful. It was great. And
like Eve 100 or something with her bathrobe.
She was great. She later became like a private detective in Florida. And I was glad to hear that. But yeah, that many viewings of Taxi Driver, just the score alone, the music, because this drive-in was surrounded by cornfields. So it's not like we were in like...
Tell me again the name of the town?
Mount Vernon, Ohio.
Mount Vernon.
Yeah. So we're sitting out with the cornfields, and there's like the Herman score and Travis Bickle coming through the steam of the manholes in the Hell's Kitchen. I mean, what a contrast that was.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think my older sister had moved to this city. Well, not yet, but she ended up being in the West Village, and I used to visit her any chance I got and just take in all the sights of New York City. And I said, I want to move here. I mean, no offense to the corn Amish country of Ohio, but
right,
it just wasn't for me.
And so you did eventually move there, right?
Yeah, right out of college. Made a pit stop in Wheeling, West Virginia. I worked at an afternoon daily, mostly writing obituaries. Shout out to John Penny, the Rhinebeck guy, who was also a reporter at that paper. And then years later, we wind up in the same neighborhood in Rhinebeck.
Writing obituaries, my goodness.
There was a lot of them.
Yeah.
Wheeling, West Virginia was a dying town.
Never run out of stuff to write about.
Yeah. And also the whole Tom Waits thing. I had just moved into this apartment out of college, and I forgot my box of tapes, cassette tapes, but I had one, and it was Rain Dogs. So I listened to it over and over again. And the imagery of that city, Wheeling, fit. Like, it was like a live music video for every Waits song,
right.
And especially that album.
That's amazing. And when you moved to New York, did you find the song or an album that was the live music video for that?
I moved into Red Hook on one of the hottest summers. I think it was summer of '87. Red Hook
in Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, yeah. Stray dogs running around. There was gunfire from the project. It was like Dodge City, basically.
Yeah.
So I think it became like hardcore punk, like something that Minor Threat, that type of urgency. That would be the music video. The Bad Brains, that kind of like high energy, like
right
fight.
Like 2 or 3 of them are in Woodstock.
Yeah,
Bad Brains.
It's interesting. A lot of them are up here. Yeah. One of the greatest bands of all time, in my opinion.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like them okay.
Have you seen them live?
I've got one album. I've never seen them live.
I see. That's what sells you on the Bad Brains.
That would have been nice. I would have loved to have seen them live. Daryl and Dr. No were over there.
That's right.
So you've seen a lot of concerts, it seems like.
Yeah, I call them shows. I didn't see too many big
concerts.
Like big arena shows. Although my first concert was Devo at the Ohio Center in Columbus in 1980.
That was a concert, not a show.
Yeah, because it was a big room.
And that's the difference.
To me, yeah, a show is
more than 500
at the
seats as a
VFW
concert.
in Gainesville, Florida, when you're seeing Iron Cross and Agnostic Front. That's a show.
Agnostic Front. I've heard that name in forever.
Another tremendous band.
And so, of the shows and or concerts you've seen, what's the top 1 or 2?
I'd say Rammstein at the Roxy in New York City. That was a game changer.
Rammstein, and that's a hardcore,
a German
metal.
Industrial metal act with pyrotechnics that are out of this world. I mean, it's if you see their videos, you'll know this is not just a band; it's an experience. That I saw them a few times.
Plus, in the '80s, when there wasn't
they were
tons
a little
of that
later.
stuff.
The Rammstein, I think, was mid '90s.
Oh, okay.
And they are
But still, there's not tons of that kind of...
And they're singing in German, so we can call it opera if you want. But
a concert, regular opera concert.
The Roxy was pretty small. That was one of their first shows in the States. Bad Brains at the Kilimanjaro Club in D.C. was another one. And Bad Brains at Wetlands in New York City the day my car got towed. I was with Stuart Verley, local guy, best friend, roommate. He found me at the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, slumped over the bar. He's like, Spike, what happened? I said, oh, my car got towed again. You know, and that's a big deal.
What kind of car?
It was a Nissan Sentra.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't worth like $50, but just used it to go around Brooklyn.
But the fines would just like keep piling
just
up.
Getting it out. And he's like, well, do you want to go see Bad Brains? I'm like, suddenly I wasn't slumped, and we ended up at Wetlands, and it was awesome. I'll never forget that.
And did you live near the Cowgirl Hall of Fame?
No, but I had family connections there. My brother-in-law, Zeke Peabody, he was a partner in that, and Sugar Reef, which was an 80s gold mine of debauchery.
Yeah.
The Gulf Coast over on the west
Loved
side.
Gulf Coast.
And Tortilla Flats.
Oh, man.
So that was,
loved Tortilla Flats,
that's
too.
the Mount Rushmore of cash-only restaurants in the 80s.
Yeah.
That were just...
And that was my neighborhood.
And, yeah, and our buddy Charles Derbyshire was a bartender at Tortilla Flats when I met him.
Man.
Can you believe that?
Yeah, Charles. Though he was Charlie back then.
Yes, he was. And he was too big for that bar. It was a tiny bar. I just remember him singing with 8 deep, and you got like, Bianca Jagger coming in or whoever, and he's just slinging tequila, and it's like, you need an umbrella. It's just raining down. It was so busy.
You remember seeing Charles there?
I was a busboy there when he was a bartender.
So you guys knew each other?
Kind of, yeah.
That's hilarious.
I didn't seem to get his shifts. He had the primo shift.
Flats. They had the Velvet Elvis room.
Yeah, and the Ernie Borgnine booth.
We always tried to get the Ernest Borgnine booth.
And the hula con. It was entertainment.
In fact, a friend, probably because of that, started a band, because everybody started a band back then, and it was called the Borgnines. Shout out to Claire.
I like that.
The other Borgnines.
He was great in Escape from New York as the cabbie.
The cabbie.
Yeah, he was brilliant.
So back to Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
What was the music in Taxi Driver that really affected you?
Bernard Herrmann, I think, did the score.
Okay.
A famous German classical composer.
So it was a score. There weren't sort of pop songs.
It was dark strings. It was a lot of brooding cellos and like minor key horns. I'm not technically knowledgeable about music instruments, but just hearing that over the cornfield was great. And also just the way he shot it, the point of view of a driver's level, like putting the camera where your rear view mirror is. And that's kind of how I see the world every day now. But driving through New York City, the slow drive, like when you don't have a fare, you tend to slow down.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of scenes of Travis just kind of contemplating, driving through Times Square past the Fascination Arcade where I got a fake ID, and looking at the prostitutes and wondering, why are we here? This is a filthy place.
And so here's probably another alias. What was your fake ID name?
Well, it was actually my motel name, but the age and you just changed the year.
Yeah.
So you need your real name on those.
You do.
I think I still have it.
Really, I wish I had.
You
my
go into
fake
a
ID.
booth, and Fascination was great. It was an arcade. And there was back rooms where they had like weird pachinko pinballs and strange kind of games of chance that may or may not have been legal, but you had to be older to get back in there. But they had the fake ID booth and all these broken down pinball machines.
So you could get a fake ID in the front of the place, then use it to get into the back.
Well, yeah, that's a good process. And you see, there's a scene in Taxi Driver where he rolls past Fascination. It had a very bright marquee. Imagine that on 42nd Street.
Oh, man.
But there it is. There's Fascination. I was like, I know that block.
In what year did you roll into New York City?
87. And then I ended up working in Times Square, of course.
Whereabouts?
At a trade magazine, the Gralla publications. The most obscure trade magazines you've ever heard of.
And which ones did you write for?
I wrote for Corporate Travel.
Oh.
Yeah. That was a highbrow. And they had like kitchen and bath news, meeting news. I actually interviewed their sporting goods news. They didn't like me. The old guy didn't like my attitude. And the kitchen and bath guy, I knew I wasn't. I said, he's like, why would you want to write for this magazine? I said, I'd love to be the toilet editor because I know my shit. He's like, get out of here, kid. And he boots me out the door.
It's not.
Can I say that word on this?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, this is cable or something.
Yeah.
You can say whatever we want.
But yeah, but I got to work in Times Square. So what the heck? You know, in 1988, you go to Nathan's for lunch, go to the Big Apple Theater to watch a continuous porn movie. What do you want?
I started working in Times Square in 1982, and on every corner they were passing out coupons for Nathan's. There's like 4 hot dogs for $1.99.
Yeah. 82. Wow.
Yeah.
You're an OG, Norm.
Making $10,000 a year. So those coupons were like really valuable.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, I need the 4 hot dogs.
Yeah, well, yeah. I used to go to the Red Ruby Chinese restaurant on 8th Avenue. And that's where a lot of the ladies of the night would have their lunch, I guess. Maybe breakfast.
Ladies
I don't know.
of the afternoon.
Yeah, I would just sit at a table next to them and just listen to them talk. And I was like, I'm not in Ohio anymore.
No. And do you still have people in Ohio?
Yeah. My other older sister, Ellen, and her husband, Rick Sheffield, who's about to retire from Kenyon College. The Kenyon campus was very important place for me. The bookstore, that's where I first saw the Village Voice. It was open late. Kenyon was a cool place to be around. And my mother moved back to Ohio. She's 92 and still driving her Camry.
Nice.
And hey, Mom, she was sending me March Madness updates. She really got into the basketball tournament this year, which is awesome. And she's a Pirates fan. She's been to all 3. She went to Forbes Field. She went to Three Rivers Stadium and also PNC Park. So that's not a lot of people can say that.
Pirates fan. Now you're wearing a hat. There's a P on it.
Yes,
I don't know what that's for.
That would represent the Pittsburgh Pirates Baseball Club.
Pittsburgh Pirates.
1887
and
founded.
How did you come to be a Pittsburgh Pirates fan?
Well, 98% of my family's from Western Pennsylvania. Just north of Pittsburgh. My mom grew up in Butler.
And Pittsburgh's about as far west as you can get in the south side of the state, right?
Yeah, it's like middle of the state. 16 miles to the West Virginia border, 6 miles of West Virginia, and then the Ohio border. It's that weird panhandle that's ridiculous. So a few years before I was born, my dad got transferred to Ohio from Grove City, Pennsylvania. And, my mom's father was a Pirates fanatic. He was just... she says I've inherited a lot skills.
It's called generational trauma, I think.
But it's he saw 1 World Series win. I've seen 2, so I'm 1 up on Walter Eisler.
So when they come to New York to play, do you make a point to go down?
I used to religiously show up at Shea Stadium and get mustard thrown on me and stuff. But that was back when fans cared about this stuff. The Mets and Pirates were rivals for years. Now they're in different divisions. The Mets are big spenders. The Pirates are basically a volunteer organization at this point. So now there's a lot less passion. And, there's a lot less of a rivalry. Yeah. And also, if I showed up, they wouldn't throw mustard on me because the fans are just less intense now than they were back then.
Why do you think that is?
Ticket prices. It was a lot cheaper back then. You could, in the cheap seats, as they say, you would get regular working class people who had a few too many beers, and then they would tussle. And that was standard.
And they'd look for an easy mark.
And
somebody wearing a Pirates hat.
He's wearing the wrong hat.
Yeah.
Let's go after him. And it was, it was fun. In the end, I look back at it, and it was, kind of miss it.
And did you get in many fights?
I never got in a fight physically, but there was a lot of condiments thrown at me. That seemed to be the Met fan weapon, was open the Golden's packet. It probably wasn't Golden's because they were so cheap. It was the Kraft yellow, and they would throw, but it would hit the yellow shirt. So, hey, you can't tell I got hit with mustard. I'm wearing a mustard-colored shirt.
Fights, and somewhere in one of the things I was reading about you, there was this great line. It was not yours, but I'd never read it before. I went to a boxing match, and a hockey game broke out.
Oh yes, that's
such a good line.
That is either Dangerfield or Henny Youngman. There's a lot of theories about who stole that from who.
It's a famous line?
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
I'm pretty sure that's Rodney Dangerfield. but there's people that claim that he stole it from Henny Youngman. But then, that'll be an ongoing
I like
debate.
that. And then
forever.
Henny Youngman hurled a whole container of Grey Poupon at it.
Exactly.
Speaking of Grey Poupon, you've got some champagne for us.
Well, yes. This would be the Italian version,
Prosecco.
I guess. Yeah. I prefer Cava because I like Spain more than Italy, but I just grabbed this when I was in town.
Well, thanks for bringing it.
Well, I
In keeping with the tradition of the show,
Yeah.
you brought a libation for us to enjoy.
and it's a cocktail with a sound effect that's very famous.
Oh, well, let's hear it.
And because this is what you do when you win the World Series, is you open these type of
I
containers.
mean, what's the last year that the Pittsburgh team won the World Series?
1979 October, my freshman year of high school.
All right, good. Well, let's celebrate that.
But I wasn't of drinking age, so I waited till college till I started imbibing.
Yeah, I did not.
There it is. We won.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yay.
And I didn't even shake it up. So
Yeah, well, thank you. This is a small booth here.
here's to Willie Pop Stargell,
And
Dave the Cobra Parker, and Omar Moreno.
and were they all members of that 1979 World
Yes,
Series
indeed.
winning
Yep.
Pirates team?
Beat the Baltimore Orioles.
And can you name all of the starters? You probably can.
Yeah, I think I can, yeah. I get this quiz from some smart Alex in the taxi. Oh, a Pirates fan, huh? I'm like, yeah. And I show them my tattoo, and they say, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Cincinnati, just down the road, and we were kind of rivals with Pittsburgh
I'd
teams.
say the Big Red Machine, and they got in the way every year.
I graduated in '78, and all through my high school, they were amazing.
They had battles with the Reds that were just epic. And I think my brother Dan became a Reds fan when we moved to Ohio. And now he lives on the West Coast, so he's a Giants fan. I said, Dan, how can you keep switching teams? I can't do that.
Well, here's to burying the Cincinnati-Pittsburgh hatchet. Thanks
Yes.
for bringing the
Tink.
tink tink. Cheers, Matt.
Yeah.
Delicious.
Oh, it's refreshing bubbles.
Very, very refreshing. So, what else? Tell me about marching bands. I wrote this down. You posted this thing, and when I say I started drinking younger, I started drinking when I was in marching band.
Oh,
We
were
would-
you?
Yeah, every Friday we would
Wow.
somehow get a bottle of Boone's Farm or Annie Greenspring or something. And we'd get a little bit tipsy before we marched.
Really?
At the local football game.
Wow, that's impressive.
Well,
Well, it's hard to get through those experiences with,
it was a
high school football.
blast. So when I saw on your Facebook thing how much you loved the marching band,
That's a recent thing. My friend Doug Stewart, Matty Mudd, would always send me videos of the Script Ohio that the Ohio State Marching Band does. And it's an incredible thing to see. I realized, man, I saw that live once, and I was in high school, and I thought, it's a marching band. And then suddenly I appreciated the choreography, and also the Ohio University Band does a similar act that is just breathtaking when you see it. Maybe it's the brass that has some effect on you.
but also the designs, the patterns
Yeah.
that they
Yep.
make it's a little bit mesmerizing.
It is.
To see what they're going to do next in a
Yeah.
well put together show.
Yep.
I'm obviously a fan.
Well, what instrument did you play?
I play the trumpet.
There you go. You need a lot of trumpets.
Yeah, they needed a whole bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, not as many as they need.
And the tradition of the senior tuba player for the Ohio State Band gets to dot the I on the Script Ohio during the Michigan game. It's like the highest honor of any musical sort. It's like 10 Grammys wrapped into one if you get to dot the I.
That's
And they do
hilarious.
it. They do it the same every year. Tradition has been around for decades.
I had no idea. That's wonderful.
So it's a recent appreciation. I thank my friend Doug for that.
And do they have marching bands at the Kingston Stockade games?
I think they had half of the Kingston has high school has a band. They had a truncated version in the stands for one game, and that was fun.
Of the band?
Yeah, they didn't go on the field, but they were in the Dietz Stadium Wonderwall, and that was nice having them there. But maybe someday they'll get the whole band. But
What's the Wonderwall? That's a part of the stands, or
well, that's what I call it. There was a stadium in Manchester that Man City played in, Main Road, I think it was called. and they had this huge stand. They have one in Germany too, in Dortmund. It just is a million rows, just like a pyramid. There's no like hanging deck, and that was known among Man City fans as the Wonderwall, which Oasis, being Man City fanatics, their hit song Wonderwall is based on that. You're my Wonderwall, meaning
I had no idea.
It's a brilliant lyric. I love that song. And so the way Dietz Stadium is, it's like a microscopic version of that type of pyramid-style construction of a bleacher section. So I just started calling it the Wonderwall.
And is it sticking?
With me, it is. I think Steve Patch might use it occasionally. I use it in the fanzine a lot. I'm going to keep doing it until it sticks.
Smart. and you and Steve Patch, another Rhine Cliff resident, a couple doors,
2 doors down from here.
Are you call the game?
Yeah.
Is one of you do play-by-play, the other does color, or both? Or?
Steve mostly does the play-by-play. He knows technically more about the game than I do, formations, positions. I just do the snarky off-color color. And it's the greatest job in the world. And it's not a job. It's we volunteer.
Are they recorded somewhere?
It goes live over a streaming service.
Yeah.
It used to be Facebook. The league, the NPSL has now cut a deal with an outfit called 11, which used to be called My Kuju. It's one of these smaller streaming services that specializes in regional sports. And it's pretty good, actually. It's a good stream. It's technically, they got a good technical staff in Kingston. This Moon Farmer company, Dan Stone, Cale Capishellen, they put together the best video package, I think, of any team in the league. And I've looked at a lot of them. I mean, this is quality, what they're doing in Kingston.
Cale's pretty good.
Oh, that guy's a genius.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times when somebody vandalized the press box and they had the wires, and he and Dan figured out a way to bounce something off the roof over across the way from the stadium, and they had an AT&T hot zone set up or something, and we were on the air. It was great.
Amazing.
Yeah, I love it.
And when did you become a soccer fan? Because, of course, in the U.S., when we were kids, it was not a popular sport.
I believe ESPN arrived, winter of 81 in Ohio, cable. One of the first things I saw on ESPN was an FA Cup final. I think Nottingham Forest was in it. I can't remember the team specifically, but they kept showing the crowd. The crowd was standing and singing.
Right.
I say, what is this? Is this church? I guess it is. This is a religious experience. And I thought, you know what? I want to be part of that. That to me is being a spectator. They're participating. They're creating what they call an atmosphere.
That's right.
And you hear the singing, and it affects the players. They all talk about how hard it is to play at Crystal Palace. The fans are right on top of you. It's kind of like Wrigley Field or Philly or Fenway in baseball. And I thought, you know what, and I started following it on ESPN, and I got hooked. And then, now it's easy to watch. Now you can watch almost any game.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different channels. Some of them, many of them in Spanish.
Yeah, that's how I started. Did a lot of Mexican soccer over the winter. It warms me up. You go to Gabby's. Delfino knows. He just points and says, I said, Delfino, who should I bet on? He points to Pachuca. Things work out.
Things work out. So you augment the taxi driving income with a little gambling.
I don't use it for income. It's just for shits and giggles, if you will. Finally getting to having watched so many sports my whole life, and that's all I've done, really.
And do you have another alias for your gambling persona?
No, it's not a persona. Believe me, my nuanced $3 bets are not getting any type of following. It's amazing what you can bet on, though. I think the arrival of sports betting in New York State makes us a civilized country at last. Because you go to England, you go overseas, you can bet without having to call Vinny Boombots from a corner payphone. You go into a nice betting shop, everything's, the kids are there, there's a little play area, you can have a tea or a beverage, right. And it's civilized. And we're just now arriving in that here, but an online version, the app, using your phone. There's no betting shops, physical brick and mortar. But then
there used to be when I moved to New York. There were OTBs.
Well, that's a state-run corruption.
Are those still around?
Barely. That's the only bookie in the history of the world to lose money. New York Racing Association.
Yeah. I heard of a casino owner who lost money.
Oh,
once.
really?
Yeah.
Well,
he became president.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah.
Casinos. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you do writing apart from the taxi cab stories?
I do a lot of sports stuff. I mean, they say write what you know. That's the cliche. And I said, well, I grew up playing sports and watching sports. Let's not write about economic policy. Let's write about sports, or sport, as they say in England. And so I do a lot for splicetoday.com, which is run by Russ Smith and his sons. Russ was the publisher of New York Press in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And was kind enough to publish my rantings for many, many years.
And what did you rant about in the New York Press?
Mostly the corruption of corporate sports, baseball, soccer. Why aren't people paying attention to soccer? The usual stuff I've known, chastising the
cranky writer stuff.
You know, and I wasn't even old enough to be cranky back then, but I guess I am now. But
What do you think the age is where you can finally be
that's
cranky
a good
with
question.
a straight face?
I think now 30. But no, he referred to me as a psychedelic sports writer back in the day. And I didn't do any psychedelics, but I did push the envelope with a lot of self-indulgent, overwritten imagery, and just for the fun of it.
Overwritten imagery. I love your overwritten imagery, and actually, I'm going to share a piece right here.
I have no filter.
It's from one of your taxi. I'll read a couple of pieces. This line from one of your Facebook taxi cab stories.
Okay.
It just struck me. You're talking about dropping an old woman off in her house, and she went inside to get the money.
Yeah.
And you're like hanging out, waiting. She didn't come. You get out. You're wandering around, and you're in the garage, and you're talking about the things in the garage. And you said, "A coiled garden hose plots a jailbreak near the garage entrance." And I'm like, that's so good.
Thank you.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful imagery. And then this, people in your cab, a couple of hipsters, I think you might have described as. You say, he wants to go out, but she doesn't because she had a definite abscess tooth type of situation. And then she says, I woke up and I took a fondue fork and jabbed it out to get rid of the pus. She says to me, And ugh, ew, bummer having that in your taxi cab. But B, the language, she says to me,
I don't know where I picked that up.
I was going to ask.
I've been doing it for years. I think I had a gossip column in the Brooklyn paper in the early 90s called The Dumpster. It was just like an anonymous, and that's where the Runyon stuff came in. I think I was reading a lot of that kind of stuff, the old New York writers, and Breslin, who's my hero. So I do these like Walter Winchell style item. Saw Norm Magnusson on the street the other day. He's looking a bit bedraggled, never getting that insulting, but just kind of free form imagery that you pick up. A lot of bar stuff too, because I like saloons.
Which saloons around here do you fancy?
Well, there's not many. That's the problem. No. I mean, there are none. Nobody stays open late enough. I mean, I'm not really a big daytime drinker, even though it's light out now and we're swilling bubbles. But I don't want to name names, but because there's really not many. I love Snapper McGee's in Kingston.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that's punk rock. That's punk rock.
I imagine that
jukebox is outstanding.
Is it?
Yes, and I'm so glad they reopened after the lockdown, because they were closed for a long time.
Oh, it was? I didn't know. Yeah. I've been there a few times.
Oh, it's beautiful.
You said the jukebox is punk rock.
Oh, it's like the Encyclopedia Britannica of punk. Everything is represented, and it's almost alphabetical too. But one of the tattooed bartender Betty's was talking about how she has chickens in her yard and her neighbors keep trying to kill them, and he had this really violent story about wrestling her neighbor who was trying to kill her poultry. It's welcome to Kingston.
Yeah. Now, bartender Betty, this is a noun you use a lot, I guess, to describe.
That's probably going to be outlawed
the death of you.
I got Betty from the surfers in Florida. I spent a summer in Florida at my mom's house. And these local stoner surfer guys who were like baked golden brown dudes, all they did was surf. They pretty much dropped out. I was like, how do you go to high school at Cocoa Beach High School? 10 feet away, there's like great curls. And they would say, hey, let's go up to in the Atlantic, there's some pretty cool Bettys up there. And I said, okay. Well, and then I said, what do you mean Bettys? The girls, come on.
It's hilarious.
Square.
I think it comes from some of the old 40s movies, too. Like Gumshoe.
I'm sure you could find a reference in
Top Shelf Betty.
Film noir type of movie. The guys wrestling over a lit burner. That stuck with me. There's certain, I get in a rut linguistically sometimes, but I enjoy it. It's all kind of self-indulgent, and then I think most of writing is, but don't let the secret get out.
So when you get in a rut, stylistically, in terms of your writing, where do you go to get out of that rut? And also, could I please have some more champagne?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
Delightful.
you, Spike.
Lloyd the bartender here.
Fabulous.
Shining reference for you.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I know. I look back at some of my writing that I found in the shed. It's like, man, I relied on movie references way too much in the early days. Everything was a cinematic reference because I think that was coming out of my
one whole post, which is sort of the architecture of a monologue from Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful stuff. Also, The Shining. I want to say this, a little piece of trivia. The Shining, which you probably know this. Stephen King, who wrote the book, hated Kubrick's version so much that he bankrolled his own version of the book. And it was released, and everybody hated it.
I had no idea. I hadn't heard that.
Yes, and I've Googled it, I checked it out, and you can't find it because supposedly he took it all back. He took it out of circulation.
Yeah.
But this is one of my major goals. I want to see.
Yeah,
I want to see his version of. All right, we've got Stephen Patch here.
A drop in.
It's like how big is the booth at the?
It's much larger than this studio apartment we're in now. This reminds me of Rivington Street in Manhattan. This would be $8,000 a month.
Yeah.
And you barely fit a mattress in here.
Not as well ventilated.
Yeah, so Peter Boyle's speech in Taxi Driver is really, I think, I don't know, it's the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I compared the script to what they actually shot. There was a lot of improv because Scorsese does that. He lets these guys go off. But I think that Peter Boyle's speech as the wizard outside of the cafeteria when Travis says, I got some bad ideas. And Boyle gives this nonsensical kind of roundabout, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, kid. Go out, you're young, get laid. And you watch that, and it's like everything he describes is like one guy's a doctor, another guy is a lawyer. People die, people are born. And then you realize, like, it's not that random up here. Like, it's not New York City, obviously. We're like the hayseed version of Taxi Driver. But it's the same culture, though. The drivers hang out. Everyone needs change for a $5, or they owe somebody $5, and the jokes are kind of the same. And I look back at that film, and there they are, the same dialogues, and it's 100% accurate, and at least in my experience here. With the guys, I've worked with a lot of different drivers from other companies, and they've come and gone, and a lot of long-term customers who have died. I can count at least 8 old ladies that expired. Made it into their 80s. But eventually, too many doctor visits, and next thing you know, you're reading their obituary in the Kingston Daily Freeman.
Right. Well, may they rest in peace.
I do read. I've been reading obits.
Well, as somebody who used to write them, I can imagine
I don't
you
know.
have.
It's one of these things where.
And you also used to write gags.
Yeah,
Who did you write gags for?
It was a ESPN show called Cheap Seats with the Sklar brothers. They were like a comedy team, specializing in like bro culture, sports, and Cheap Seats was like a Mystery Science Theater type of approach to sports, where they would watch games and make snarky comments, and they would send the reels out to me in Brooklyn, and I would send them my snarky comments, and if they used them, you get paid. It was a great gig. And
do you remember any of them? Just put you right on the spot.
Yeah, they were all kind of off the cuff. Demolition Derby jokes, and Yeah, Todd Pellegrino got me that gig. I was in between jobs. I've been in between jobs a million times, and
so
someone always comes through.
So if they used a gag, would you get like $50 or $200?
I would send them, maybe 60, 70 gags for one, 50-minute show. And
so you'd watch the show, or they'd tell you what the show was going to be about?
Yeah, they'd send me a check, and I could figure out how many of my gags they used. And I watched the show and say, "Oh, that's mine." It was fun.
It must have been kind of fun to see your.
It was a funny show. Those guys are good.
Where are they now?
I think they're probably doing podcasts, or they're on the internet somewhere. I mean, they kind of predicted all that stuff. But, yeah, they were good. The Sklar brothers. I never met them in person, but I got a writing credit. It was great. I mean, sports television. That's where the trade magazines, like you say, we barely got paid back then. But then once I got into TV, that's where the money is.
Yeah.
You get these huge checks to write, a 10-minute voiceover script for Major League Baseball productions. And
what were those like? Who was delivering those scripts?
I worked with John Sterling, the Yankee announcer, on these shows called Yankeeography. And those were long form.
Yankeeography.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on the Yes Network. They pick a Yankee and they do like a bio, like an hour bio, mini documentary, if you will. No Ken Burns stuff, and then there was another highlight show called Baseball Max, which was a fast-paced, in-your-face kind of, let's get the younger kids into this, no shot longer than 4 seconds, attention deficit kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I did the punchy highlight script for that. And this guy, Tom Vargas, not Vargas, he was our voiceover guy. And it was sponsored by Dial deodorant. No,
Dial deodorant soap.
Some deodorant. I had to work those in at the beginning and the end.
That's hilarious.
But MLB had money to burn. They literally still are burning money. They built this huge studio in Chelsea Market in the West Village there, and then tore it down and moved back to Jersey.
Yes.
They left the MLB.com is still there as far as I know, but all they do is burn bridges.
And do you do any of that anymore? I'm guessing not.
No, I've lost my TV connections. They kind of burned up. I'm trying to think the last TV gig I did. I can't remember. It's been that long. I still send the occasional boozy email to some of these producers saying, "Hey, throw me a bone here," but they got nothing.
They got nothing.
Yeah, it's all unscripted now.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, mostly.
Huh. Well, I'm holding in my hand a book called Bench Clearing, Baseball's Greatest Fights and Riots by the guy whose nom de plume is Spike Vrusho.
You're correct.
How did this happen, this book?
A book editor came to a party I threw, and he got lucky. He met a nice girl, and he had a good night. And no, he was with a friend of mine who actually, C.J. Sullivan, who writes for the Post, is a great shoe leather brigade reporter, Bronx native, great guy. He brought this guy, this anonymous book editor I didn't know, to my party, and he loved it. And a couple of weeks later, I get an email from this guy saying, "By the way, I met that girl. She was awesome. Do you want to write a book about baseball fights?" So they came to me. I didn't have to pitch anything.
Oh, wow.
I know. There's a Bukowski moment.
Was it?
I was sitting there swilling Schaefer. Wow, they want me to write a book. Okay. So I said, at that point, I was just transitioning to Rhinebeck from Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And I didn't know. My daughter was just born. Can I do this? Do I have the discipline? He came up. We met at Foster's, handshake deal, Lions Press out of Connecticut. They do a lot of sports books. And 11 months later, they had the manuscript and the paperback arrived, and I did it.
That's a lot of work for 11 months.
Yeah, it could have been a lot more work. I'm kind of glad that Twitter and Instagram and all the social media weren't really around in 2007. Otherwise,
but the internet was.
Yeah,
which had to be super helpful for this.
It was. Newspaper archive was my big go-to, because YouTube really didn't have a whole lot back then. They were just kind of coming. Now you can find any incident that was in front of a camera is on YouTube. So, yeah. So I got it done. I didn't overdo the interviewing. I said, let's just do this anecdote based on what a law book was like referring to each fight as a case.
Yeah,
that was my idea. And So that was kind of the framework, and I got it done. I didn't know if I could. I got it done. It did okay. Baseball books always come out in March with 10,000 other baseball books. Did a lot of morning zoo interviews with all these sports guys in Cincinnati, WLW, whatever.
Yeah.
Everywhere, Cleveland. I'd be sitting in the taxi on the phone doing these radio interviews. Like, I'm sorry, Miss Johnson, I can't take you to the grocery store. I'm doing an interview with some AM radio guys in Schenectady. So it was fun though, and that's what the book's about.
It's a beautiful book. I read a couple of the fights. Do you have a favorite fight in there?
Probably the one I was at Yankee Stadium when Graham Lloyd went after the Baltimore Orioles. Tino Martinez got hit in the back, and it got real in a hurry in the bullpen. There was a lot of grabbing, the usual shirt tugging, and then Graham Lloyd, the Australian reliever, comes flying in from the bullpen and starts throwing haymakers, and then it turned into absolute melee that spilled into the Yankee dugout. Darryl Strawberry was going crazy, but it turned into the Roman Coliseum. All of a sudden, young girls and their moms are standing up saying, kill him, kill him. It's like the bloodlust was there because it had built up. They had a few beanings, and the Orioles and the Yankees had been, that year had been tussling a lot. And, the Yankees, kind of the arrogance of that organization brings out a lot of, testosterone on the other side. So I enjoyed seeing it live. That's one of the better ones.
Yeah. I read when I read Bud Harrelson and Pete Rose.
Oh yeah, geez. See, that's one that took place in the dust. I mean, and rare, because they stirred up so much dust, you couldn't see what was going on because the groundskeeping wasn't that great.
Like every cartoon fight ever.
Yeah, dust cloud.
Yeah,
limb, and then it was also in a playoff game, which you rarely see fights in the postseason because that's when you don't want to lose players.
There's too much writing on it.
Yeah, exactly. And now there's too much writing on every contract. That's why there's so few physical connections between fist and face in the baseball world. There's been 2 probably in the last 3 years.
And is that good for the sport? Good for the spectators? Good for...
like I say, it's fun when it's live. Now, like I say, you can look up every fight on the internet. And after a while, it gets a little tedious. It's kind of the same stuff. Unless you're like a baseball nerd and you're like, oh, I didn't know that guy was on the team. Because the bench guys come out and you see, oh, that's, or the old coaches get involved. And then it gets a little sad when you have seniors being trampled by, young strapping men, a la Don Zimmer versus Pedro Martinez. That was a stunning image to see Zimmer, tumbling over and Pedro Martinez, wearing their satin jackets. I'll never forget that.
Right. So who were some of the best coaches of all time, do you reckon?
Well, Danny Murtaugh of the Pittsburgh Pirates, thus my fanzine.
Fanzine named Murtaugh.
Yeah, Chester, Pennsylvania. He had the map of Ireland on his face. That was the description that sold me on him. Sparky Anderson of the Big Red Machine.
Yeah, baby.
He had a certain... I don't know, there was something like an Indian, Native American. He's from South Dakota. So,
there was something.
He
I
had
forget.
that. And he just looked, I looked in his eyes once and I got a little scared. He was like looking right through me. Same with George Foreman, 2 guys that I've been scared to make eye contact with.
Interesting.
Foreman, though, was a sweet guy. Sparky was very quiet. And it was at spring training and I did a mini photo shoot with the Tigers, and that was great to meet him. And I think Sparky and Danny, and they went against each other a lot back in the day, when you referred to.
Yeah.
And
I just want to say, I went to the index of your book, Bench Clearing, Baseball's Greatest Fights and Riots, and
came out in 2008.
Johnny Bench, not in there at all. I played catcher when I played Little
Nice. League. Of course you did.
And... I don't know why,
it's
of
the
course.
Brains of the team right there.
Oh, boy.
Running the show.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to call this thing off. It's been an hour. It's been an amazing hour.
It went by fast.
Yeah. Do you have a last word for...
tip your driver.
Tip your driver.
And your bartender, if you can find one.
Yeah. Tip your bartender first, and then get a cab home, and don't forget to tip your driver.
Did I forget to refer to you as the larger, hairier David Frost?
No.
That was my.
And more or less English.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Spike Vrusho, for being here and talking with me.
Absolute pleasure.
And everybody have a fabulous Friday and a great weekend. And I hope the weather holds.